Hey everybody, this is my third video to the Python YouTube channel that I'm starting. And today I'm going to do some overview. I'm going to keep on going with the Python session 1, and I'm going to show one of my favorite functions that I found most interesting called the input function. So under the agenda, I have the summary from the previous video, input, and finish Python session 1. So if I jump in here, the session 1 was this thing that my friend Alan had created, this curriculum that I'll be using in my videos. And what we went over to start off with were comments. So comments include a hashtag, and as you can see here, this right here would be a comment. This stuff right here is not a comment. This is print, but those are comments, and they're helpful to show what goes on in your code. We have the more comments here with the quotes, if you need to do long lines of comments, but I doubt you would. Here we have variables, which are things you set other things to. That's my bland ghetto definition. And here we have my variable is set to cool. So if I were to play that, I would get something. I actually wouldn't get anything because nothing is happening. But if I were to go down here and go print, let's just do X, then I would get in return, oh shoot, excuse me. I just jammed my finger on the refrigerator, so my typing isn't on point right now. But I would get Sally because it's looking for this X. Now keep in mind, this is not good variable naming conventions because we have two X's, but by naming X we specify that we want Sally. Here we have the three different data types. We have strings, ints, and floats. Strings are something with quotes, so any noun, pronoun, whatever name we're talking about, if it has quotes around it, it's a string. An integer is a number, and then a float is a decimal. So down here, and I will do an exercise a little later in the video that shows this. Actually, excuse me, no it doesn't, but it does something similar. And we have type, and type converts whatever we're printing, it finds whatever is being printed here, X, and it names the naming convention. And why I mentioned we're going to do this a little later in the video is because we're going to take a certain data type and we're going to convert it, or we're going to check to make sure that it's whatever it's going to be. And you'll see what I'm talking about a little later, but this is practically the same thing. So for example, X right here would give a string. That's helpful to identify what kind of data type is going on in our code. Here I have a list of variables that you can name it to. You can see that underscore, capital, lowercase, capital, vice versa. But these are the illegal naming conventions. We can't name variables with a digit in front, a dash. Please don't do this. Here a little more. We have formats of what they're called. So when I name variables, I like to use the snake case format, where I use underscore because it looks professional and it's helpful to space out what's going on. And lastly, what I'll go over are functions. So we call functions by naming def, myfunc, and whatever goes inside is what happens to the function. So I've been explaining functions as boxes, and whatever happens inside the box is what goes on in the function. If anything is outside this box, if anything's outside this function, such as this print, then that's not going to be included into the function. So as you can see, X equals awesome, print Python is X. So it'll print Python is awesome right here. But if we're calling myfunc with this function, X equals fantastic. So it's going to give us something different. And the last thing we finished off was here between floats, integers, and complex. So these are the different digits that are used in Python, I guess I can say, because we have ints, floats, and complex numbers are confusing. They're not super necessary to understand. I'm learning advanced intermediate Python right now, and I've never seen complex numbers, or so far I haven't. So we're not going to get into that. So here I will jump into the input. So on my slides, oh, and please, I forgot to mention this at the beginning of the video. Please subscribe and please like. I really want this channel to grow. I want more people to watch these videos to educate themselves on Python. I really want to be able to teach people programming because I think it's a fantastic thing. And as as always, I've included another silly picture here. This one I like a little better. It's in Hawaii. When we were doing a trip in Hawaii, back there was the same setting where they filmed Jurassic Park, and that's me just making a face. So now we have input functions, my favorite kind of functions. And what is input? So for those of you that are new to computer science, input is essentially what you type into the computer. So you can think of it like gift giving. You give someone a gift, and then in return they give you a gift. So input is you giving somebody a gift. You're giving the computer something, and the computer receives the information and processes it any way you specify the computer to process the information. Why use input? Well, this corresponds with output, which is somebody giving a gift back to you, and output is, so for example, the print statement is the print function is a really good analogy, because with print we can do input, so whatever's in the quotes, whatever's our string, that would be our input, and then our output is whatever we specify inside the string. And the input function simply is input with these little parens. So in my where am I? In my REPL, if it'll load, I have created a little exercise that will show you how input is used. And input is, as I mentioned before, so this is my exercise, but input, as I mentioned before, is simply input with the parentheses. And that is essentially all you need with your input. So if I were to type this out, so let's say I were to run this and nothing is going on, but I were just type my name. That's it. That is essentially all input does. So it gives us the ability to write something. And I just do that again, and you can see the code is stopping because that's all that's being specified here. So in my exercise, I have create two inputs and store them in variables. They should take in int, add them together to get the sum of the two inputs. So essentially what we would be doing here is we would be corresponding our concepts of variables and input. So let's say we have x equals input. So that's what I had just showed. And we want to, let's just specify what this x is. So let's just call this number 1. And then let's do the same here again, but we'll do a number 2. And we'll just name this y. Call it number 2. So I won't finish the exercise right now, and I'll just show you what's going on. So when I run this, you get number 1, right? Because I specify in those quotes what is going to be my number 1. Well, let's just make that 2. It's going to be my number 2. Let's make that 8. And that's it. That's all we have. So to slam those two variables together, we would use our print, and we would just go x plus y. And to cap that off, and this is what I explained earlier in the video, we want to check that whatever input we're inputting is an integer. So we don't want it to be a string or anything in particular. We want this to be an integer. So let's just go 3 and 4, 7. I always wondered what 3 plus 4 was. So if you can see what's going on here, that will be the exercise. We're taking the variables, we're checking if they're ints. We have our input, and we're specifying, please give us number 1 and number 2, and print the sum of the two numbers back in our Python session. So that's input. So I'll progress through the rest of the session, but I really think input is a really exciting thing because it is essentially the only function beginners learn where they're really interacting with their computer rather than learning, all of this lame junk. I mean, stuff. It's not junk. It's actually cool. Well, it's kind of cool. Here I have modules. So we're jumping past from the input function. So modules are packages, and that's not what I call them. That's actually what they are. So think of like an Amazon package or something in the mail, and they give you stuff inside. Well, you know what they give you, and same with here, you know what you're getting. So modules are there's two kinds of modules. There's the kinds that Python provides, which don't take downloading, and then there's kinds that actually developers in the world create to try to give you more access to a particular thing in Python. I know one of the lessons I was doing with Python, I was working with a module called like text color or something, and that was something I had to download, and it essentially just changed the color of my font. And I will eventually include a lesson that showcases that, because I thought it was really awesome when I learned it. But it's so these modules give us packages, and the package I got was different color fonts, like different colors. It was pretty awesome. So how we do it is we type import, and you can see it's highlighted in purple. So if I were to go back to my REPL, delete all this, and I just go import, you see that spikes up. And then in the Google Colab, I had random. And random is a particular module where it essentially mixes things. That's how I like to look at it. If you have this is a good example right here. If you have like a number between 1 and 10, and you're using this random, it'll give you any number between 1 and 10. You can see it's already been run here. So we got 8. Let's try this again. Let's see what else we get. 9. Better not give me 10. Okay, you got 5. And if I were to extend this a little bit, let's go to 11. You won't see much of a difference because I barely stretch that out. But that's essentially what we have here. And the rand range is the second piece to this line of code, where it essentially tells the computer, hey, we've got the module. Hey, we're mixing things up. Include this rand range. Down here, there will be many times when you want to specify a type onto a variable. This can be done with casting. So this is what we just did in our exercise. We want to specify what these are, and we literally include the data type in front of the parens. Here, like many popular programming languages, strings and Pythons are arrays of bytes, including Unicode characters. So in this, we have, let me see, what happens if I run that? Nothing in particular. Oh, it's getting rid of all of it. This is a really, really cool concept right here. So this is, this steps into the world of slicing. And slicing is exactly how it sounds. You're kind of cutting apart the strings that you have in Python. And if we were to have this entire statement, hello world, and we were to print it, we would get hello world. But by including these brackets and this negative value in here, we're kind of cutting it in half. So you start, so let's start from positive values. Let's say I add, say I add 2. So I get 1 in return because it's telling us the value going on in here. But I can also go, if I were to do a negative 2, that is not a 1. I am such a dummy. That's an L. Excuse me. The font here is really weird. I was going to say that would be super strange. So, as I mentioned before in my previous video, in programming, we start from 0. We don't start from 1. So we go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So H would be our 0. But if we're going backwards, D would be -1. It's confusing to think, but if you start at 0 and you end at -1. So if you think of that linearly, then that kind of helps. So if we were going -2, we go 1, 2. So we get the L. But if we were to go +2, 0, 1, 2, and we get L, but on this side. If I were to do 1s, that way you don't have to see 1s that look like L's or L's that look like 1s, then you get an E, right? So this is a really cool concept, and I'll eventually include exercises that will have you give me a certain character in the string exactly like this, and essentially all you need to do is this slicing where you specify your variable, and then you go, all right, let's go back or let's go forward, let's collect whatever's going on in here. The len function. Now this is fantastic, and I'm still wrapping my head around the significance of it, but as I mentioned before, the programming that I do, this is included a lot. And essentially what len is, it's a cut down version of the word length, and it's the length of any string, and we use the len function. So this is 13 characters, including that exclamation point at the end. And by specifying len, we're getting how long that character is. There will be things in the real world when you're programming where you need to find out the certain characters in a string. I'm thinking of a real world example. If you're doing like a video game and you type in the name of a character or something, and then you kind of your output would be however long that was in terms of values. So if I were to just do hello world comma explanation point, that would be 13. And that's simply len with the parens, because this is a function, not a statement. A statement would be something like return, and we'll get more into what this is later, but return doesn't need parens. So that's why it's a statement, not a function. Down here, you can use uppercase and lowercase in built-in functions. So upper and lowercase are really cool. Really cool. They're exactly like how they sound. Where you take a string, and by including this upper, exactly like how this function was, but we're including this a dot to specify that that's our variable, then that is uppercase. Versus here, if we do lower, all of it is lowercase. So these are this upper lower function, the len function, slicing. These are basic Python programming tools that you add in your psychological tool case, if that's a good way to say it. Like when you're programming in the real world, those of you that want to program in computer science, you'll have this tool case of things that you know. I know slicing, I know data structures, I know variables, I know how to write functions, like all of these basic things, and they build up into the projects that you're doing. Kind of like in mathematics, where you know how to solve, you know algebra, you know multiplication, you know the please excuse my dear and Sally, like that, those kinds of math tools, and then you add them together, and then you get an 80 on your pre-cal quiz, or a 95, or whatever's going on, because you're using your tools here. So essentially what I'm showing are the little tools that are included in Python. Strip is another function that essentially gets rid of any of the white spaces going on in our code. So here we have a space right here with the quotes, and by including strip, then we get rid of that, and in return we get hello world, exactly how it is. The split method splits the strings into substrings if it finds the instances of the separators. So by splitting this, we get two different things, and I want to call this a list, and I think that's accurate, but I don't want to confuse you. So lists, we haven't gone into too much depth of what they are, but they're exactly how they sound, like your mom's grocery list. She's got all of the foods that she needs at the grocery store. A list contains all of the things you need jumbled together in one variable, one whatever it is, and you can pick at it. So by including the split, we get our output, and we're just splitting this string, but we're getting rid of is because we're specifying that. So we kind of break it down into a list. Replace method is a really interesting one. So we replace whatever goes on in our string. We specify we want to replace y with h. Or did I do that backwards? I think something is going on here. Yeah, that's right. I think if it were like this, that would make more sense. Yeah, there you go. So I include the h, but we're replacing that with, I include the y, and we're replacing that with an h. And here, booleans. Oh, I love booleans. They are the holy grail to coding. They are essentially, it's true and false, and they check if something is true or false. So if we have this if statement, if b is greater than a, b greater than a, print b is greater than a. If a is equal to b is equal to a, print a is equal to b, and vice versa. So by including these, we can go, we're checking if these are true. So if they are, then we say yes, they're true. If they're not, then they say no, they're true. They're not true. And how we can include that in our code is if we go true, then that computer checks that this statement is valid. But if we go false, then that computer knows that it's false. So those are really helpful to keep in mind. And whenever I would say Boolean, whenever somebody in the computer science world says Boolean, immediately think of true and false. And that is it. That is an abrupt stop, but that is Python session 1. We went over Booleans, several functions. We went over split, replace, strip, and I'll type them here so that way they make a little more, right here. They make a little more sense. We have strip, replace. We went over input. Excuse the weird. It's saying that because it's nothing's going on with the function. So if I were to actually use it, then it wouldn't act so insane. And we went over lower, upper, and all of these functions are fantastic to keep under your belt, your tool case, because eventually when you're doing challenges in computer science and you're working with your programming, you need to know these functions, or you at least need to know that they're out there so that way you know how to use them. And I will just show you one last thing before I close up here. If I wanted to go, okay, I know there's a lower function out there, how do I use it? Lower Python. Hit enter. Let's see. W3 Schools is a great documentation. As you can see, I already have it open up here. And it's like your computer science Bible, W3 Schools, or Python documentation, which I think I showed in my first video when I taught you how to download Python. And here just it includes examples, and it teaches you how to use certain functions and methods and how to use anything in Python. Not only Python, but also, it includes JavaScript, CSS, HTML. There are so many resources out there that will teach you everything you need to know about computer science. The only struggle is finding them and utilizing them. And that's still a struggle that I'm going through today. And that's a struggle everybody goes through. So, in a very gigantic nutshell, that is Python session 1. In my next video, I will be going over Python session 2, and I'll include a little more exercises. I'll try to spice up this video to make it less bland. They're pretty long, but I try to keep them as informative and as short as I can. So I hope you find this helpful, and please like and subscribe. Thank you.